All right, everybody, it's good to see you today. We're looking at the New York Jets. We're just a few days before the draft in 2020, and this is just kind of a midstream look at what the Jets have done so far and some of the moves that they've made and where they're looking at financially and with their draft picks and everything else. And by the way, to those of you in the New York area, I know a lot of you have been hit hard by the coronavirus, so our thoughts and our prayers go out to you guys if you've lost a loved one or if you've been struggling with finances, certainly. We've been thinking about you guys a lot. You guys have been hit very hard up there in the whole New York, New Jersey area. So maybe you haven't had a lot of time to think about football, or maybe this is a little bit of welcome relief, but we appreciate you joining us today as we take a look at the Jets heading up into the draft, which is coming up in just a handful of days. So if you see this, 2 weeks from now, we'll already have some draft picks lined up and maybe even some more free agent moves that the Jets can make. It's good to see you today. We're going to start off right over here. I want to run through very quickly, for those of you who weren't part of our previous videos, what the Jets looked like last year and what they've got in terms of assets right now. At the moment, $17 million in cap space. They've already spent most of their cap money. They'll spend about $6 or $7 million in cap space on the draft picks, more than likely. So they've got $17 million to play with. If they want to go out and get somebody or make a trade, they've got the flexibility there to do that. So very much so, with $17 million, that's a very good place to be right now at this point in the offseason. Most of the big names have already been kind of taken off the board in terms of free agency. So $17 million is a good amount to have at this moment. Draft picks, of course, I'm not telling you guys anything here you don't know, but they've got number 11 pick overall, number 48, 68, and 79. So they've got 4 of the top 80 draft picks, which again is a good place to be. It's a pretty good draft year, depending on which position that you're looking for. 4 of the top 80 picks, good spot to be if you're looking in the draft. And then a handful of the lower round picks as well. So you've got all your draft picks basically, and then on top of that, you've got $17 million in cap space to spend. What were you last year? 7-9. Started off 1-7, fought your way back. I think won 6 of the last 8 games, so finishing 7-9. There were times last year when Sam Darnold was kind of getting it going. You looked like a team who even last year was kind of sort of thinking about competing for a playoff spot had you not had the 1-7 start. So pretty good roster you've got going right now. We're going to look at more of that in just a second, but you're in good shape. But this is not just typical Jets teams of the past with false hopes and things like that. Got a lot of good things going for you here if you're a New York Jets fan. And I think a lot of good things to look at going forward. How high can you go? Do you really have Super Bowl aspirations in 2 seasons? I don't know that you have that necessarily, but you're in good shape. You've got a good solid foundation here. You've got a lot of good things going for you. And I wouldn't expect, you never know, 1 injury or 2 injuries can change everything, but you wouldn't expect the New York Jets for the next 2 or 3 seasons to be back down there in the 3 or 4 win area. If they are, then something has gone drastically wrong. The talent on the roster is just better than that. It's good enough to kind of keep you in the 7 or 8 win category, and maybe better moving forward, depending on what you can do with Sam Darnold and Adam Gase and company going into year number 2. You've got a lot of good things right there. So 7-9, even though you had the 1-7 start. Offensively, all red here, of course. Nothing good on offense last year. When you look at the final statistics, Sam Darnold had some good games. You had a couple of comeback wins, I think. You had some games where you competed on offense, but at the final rankings, the offensive categories were terrible. Most of that, I would say 75 to 80% of that, to my way of thinking, can be contributed to the offensive line. The offensive line struggled. No surprise, the Jets even said during the offseason that was going to be their biggest priority. Priorities number 1, 2, and 3, I think, is what they really said, is getting that offensive line upgraded, getting it fixed. And I think when you look back at last year's offensive struggles, most of those struggles, 75 to 80%, I think, can be attributed to the offensive line. And I think maybe another 5 or 10% of that, you being a young quarterback with Sam Darnold, maybe 5 or 10% of that you can attribute to having a new coaching staff coming in with the new language and just the new systems and all that. So I think there are reasons, at least you know why the offense struggled, at least you know what you've got to work on this season. Yards per game, passing yards per game, rushing yards per game, points per game, everything is just the bottom of the league. So we're not going to beat a dead horse here, but the struggles were obvious, and why the struggles were, I think, is also obvious. and not just a young quarterback, because he showed through at times that he could play well and throw up a lot of yardage and even have a comeback come from behind victory. I think most of those struggles really trace themselves back to the offensive line. When you look over the defensive side of things, last year had a good defense. All right, this was not a top 10 defense, I don't think, but this was a defense kind of in the top 12, I think, top 13, kind of a defense last year. And in yards per game total, number 7, rushing yards per game, just absolute lockdown, number 2 overall in the league. So in those two categories, you were a top 5, top 10 defense. When you slide over to the passing yards per game, it takes you back towards the middle of the pack kind of defense, number 17, and then points per game again, you start to see that middle of the pack aspect, number 16. So you got a good defense. I think you already know that. We've seen all the draft picks that have been invested in this defense over the past few seasons, and some of them have been good draft picks and have produced. Not all of them have produced, but when you're throwing that many draft picks on the defensive side of the football, you're going to see the talent on that side, and I think you see that here. And you've got most of that coming back next year. It's a young defense. It should get a little bit better. Even if you didn't do anything at all to upgrade the defense, it should get a little bit better. So pretty good on that side of the football. The position groups, this is where I want to stop for just a second. These are the position groups at the end of the season last year. These do not reflect any of the moves that the Jets have made, and I want to take a look at that after we look at the additions and the subtractions and see how these position groups may or may not have changed at all. But let's go through what we had at the end of last year. Quarterback with Sam Darnold. I don't think you have here in Sam Darnold, I don't think you've got a guy who's going to be a star in this league. I don't think it doesn't look like, to me at least, he's ever going to be a top 5 quarterback, probably not a top 10 quarterback. The question that still remains is, can Sam Darnold, if you get enough development, if you get a little bit more development, if you get the pieces around him, and you've got some pieces already, if you get a good offensive line in front of him where he's not running for his life all the time, can he at least be a top 20 quarterback in this league, or possibly a top 15 quarterback in this league? And I think the jury's still out on that, and from what we've seen so far, we've seen moments where he looks like he can actually do that. And again, this third season coming up is going to be a big one. Adam Gase is going to want to see some development there before they try to make a decision in years 4 and 5 about what to do with Sam Darnold, whether you start looking in another direction or whether you keep trying to hang in there with him. But we've seen enough to still give us some hope here in Sam Darnold, even though I don't think he's ever going to be a Tom Brady or Peyton Manning in this league. I think we've seen enough here to where we still have some hope that this guy can develop, and if you get a good offensive line in front of him, this guy can actually be a top 20, top 15 kind of a quarterback. I think there's still hope there for that. So the blue there for him, I think we're fine. Wide receiver, you don't have any game breakers here at wide receiver, but you've got a good pack of wide receivers last year. You had Enunwa, Robbie Anderson, you had Jamison Crowder, of course. You had a good solid core there. A good group of wide receivers. The depth is there. Guys at almost every position there at wide receiver who can catch the football, reliable hands. Good solid core group of receivers there at wide receiver. And so when you look at Sam Darnold and you see here at running back, you got Le'Veon Bell. When you look at those wide receivers, and we're going to have Chris Herndon here at the tight end spot, which I didn't put that on the board, but that's included with the wide receivers. We're going to have Chris Herndon. Didn't get him last year for most of the season due to the injury. But when you had Le'Veon Bell and that core group of wide receivers, you've got weapons there for Sam Darnold. So weapons really wasn't the problem last year for Sam Darnold. Not really a true game breaker. Even Le'Veon Bell looks like he may have taken a step back off of his game-breaking kind of ability, but still a very good running back there with Le'Veon Bell. A guy who can do a lot of things very well. He can block well, he can run well, he can receive well. So weapons really was not the problem for Darnold. It seemed to mostly be on the offensive line. So when you look at wide receiver and running back right there, I think you're good. I think you're solid coming off of that. Not that you can't improve at the wide receiver position, but certainly I think you've got a solid group. The offensive line here, again, it's all red. I mean, the tackles struggled last year. The interior offensive linemen struggled last year, and so the result for the overall of the offense overall last year was just a D overall, and you can see that here on the offensive ranks. So can you improve at wide receiver heading through this offseason? Yeah, you could. Could you improve at depth at running back? Yes, you could. Could you improve at offensive line? Yes, desperately need to improve at offensive line. Basically at every position, probably bringing Brian Winters back. It looks back at this point, it looks like that's what they're going to do. But you could improve it, or certainly at all the offensive line spots. When you drop down the defensive side of things at CB, we remarked about this in a previous video. CB last year, almost everybody in the secondary in the CB side of things had a career season. So you've got Poole coming back, and if you got Millette coming back, those guys coming back, you had a decent group of CBs, and the question is, do you credit the defensive coaches for that, the defensive system, or do you credit these guys for actually stepping up and developing? We'll see more about that in 2020, what actually transpires here. Are these guys actually that good? Have they developed to that point? Or is the defensive coaches just doing that good of a job putting them in a good position? But you're still finding here at CB. I don't see any reason here to be worried about CB coming off of what we saw last season. And the safety category, of course, with May and with Jamal Adams, just tremendous lockdown safeties here. Probably, I would think, and I haven't totally looked around the league, one of the best safety combinations there in the league right there with May and with Adams. Linebacker should be good. Coming off of last season, C.J. Mosley, if you had him last season, this defense probably would have been, I would think, a top 10 defense last year. I don't think there's any question about it, but Mosley missed, I think it was either all of the season or most of the season. Got to play very little or not at all. And had you had Mosley there at linebacker, I think this defense would have really looked a lot different and a lot better, and could have, I think, been a very solid top 10 defense last year. They threatened it last year without C.J. Mosley. When you add Mosley back into the mix, man, I think you've got a guy there who can really just lock down the middle part of that field. He's solid against the run. He is solid in pass coverage, and he can get some pressure on the quarterback, even though he's not a prodigious edge rusher or a guy up the middle to get pressure on the quarterback. He can do that as well, but he's a really intelligent player, really tough player, kind of a throwback, kind of a linebacker, yet still he's pretty solid in pass coverage. If he comes off that injury, and if you get the guy that you thought you were getting when you signed him for all that money, Mosley's really going to step out here at linebacker. And having Williamson there, Williamson's not necessarily a lockdown starter, but Williamson's a guy who I think is still young enough and looks good enough. If you've got Mosley there to kind of help him along, I think Williamson is a good complement there alongside of C.J. Mosley. I think a lot depends on C.J. Mosley coming back healthy there. But for me, for the linebacker grade, I think you're good there at linebacker with the caveat of C.J. Mosley coming back healthy. Excuse me. When you look at defensive end, I've got defensive end graded good, and for this reason, you've got about 3 or 4 guys there who at the defensive end position, there's no game breakers here. There's nobody here at defensive end who's going to get constant pressure on the quarterback every play. There's nobody here that offenses have to kind of game plan for to block this guy or that guy, or chip block or double team or even triple team. There's nobody like that. But you've got guys here who are good, solid defensive ends. They understand how to get pressure on the quarterback somewhat consistently. You've got a good rotation there. If you didn't want to mess with defensive end this year, you don't have to, considering how good the rest of the defense has been last season and even the season before to a degree, but especially last season, 2019. You don't necessarily have to mess with defensive end if you don't want to, because you've got a good rotational stream of guys there who are solid against the run, who are solid against the pass and getting pressure on the quarterback. You may hear a lot of demand and a lot of screaming. I don't know. I haven't kept up with the media, the New York media lately. You may hear a lot of screaming for an edge rusher. You don't have to do that. We're seeing a lot of teams who are winning a lot of games and do not have an elite edge rusher. Now, would an edge rusher help? I think it would. I think it could kind of add some jet fuel, if you will, pun intended, add some fuel to this defense if you had a guy who could come off the edge and get pressure on the quarterback, somebody that the offenses did have to game plan for. I think that would help a lot. I think it really would, but you don't necessarily have to do that, because at defensive end, you do have a pretty good solid rotation of guys at defensive end. Not as good as what you have here at defensive tackle. When you look at defensive tackle, you have Quinton Williams, of course, who I think is up and coming as a solid defensive tackle. Probably not a star, but I think a very solid guy there at defensive tackle. Of course, Fatukasi and McClendon, very good rotational guys. I think right there at defensive tackle, you are solid up the middle. We've seen it here with the rushing yards per game, just outstanding, and still get some pressure on the quarterback. Williams isn't going to do a lot of that, but Fatukasi and McClendon can get some pressure on the quarterback from the defensive tackle position. So I really like what you have here at defensive tackle. Again, do you have anybody elite or a game breaker or a game changer? No, you don't. But you've got a good, solid defensive tackle group there, good, solid defensive line group. So I think you're fine there, and get a B+ there on the defensive side of things. Had you had C.J. Mosley, I think this is a grade A defense last year. Had you had an elite edge rusher, I think the same thing. Could have easily slid up there into the top 10, top 8. So those are the position groups, and of course the tight end position I just tossed right in there to wide receiver. I think with Trayvon Wesco coming back, you've got somebody there with Chris Herndon. If he looks healthy like he did in 2018, he looked really good in 2018. If you get that Chris Herndon back for this year, I think you're good there at tight end. So additions and subtractions. What did the Jets do this offseason? Who did they lose? And a lot of times this gets a little bit lost in the shuffle. A lot of times people talk about who you signed in free agency and who you brought in the draft, and it kind of gets forgotten. Well, who did we lose this year? Who left? Who retired? Who did we trade? Who did we just cut for money reasons? And who was a free agent? We just didn't bring them back. And that's really important. So we're going to stop right here for just a second and look at the subtractions. Who the Jets lost this offseason. We can't cover everybody. There's going to be about 40 players coming and going during this offseason. So these are just the highlights leading up into the draft for this season. And in the upcoming weeks, we'll cover more. 4 offensive linemen pretty much let go in free agency. I don't expect to see any of these 4 guys back. 2 of them at the time of this video have actually already signed with other teams. Shell, of course, and Compton have already signed with Seattle and San Francisco respectively. And then Beachum and Khalil still there on the free agent market. I don't expect to see Beachum or Khalil back. A little bit long in the tooth, probably waiting to see who they can sign with after the draft. I do expect them to sign with somebody. I just don't really think it'll be the Jets. No surprise here. The Jets had, and no surprise here, all 4 of these guys, I think at least 3 of these guys, all 4 of these guys started at some point last season. Some of them started a lot. The Jets told us that they were going to really address the offensive line. The offensive line was horrible last year. It was a disaster. And that's a disappointment to see when you have a young quarterback like Sam Darnold, who you're trying to find out how good can he be. Can he be our franchise quarterback for the next 10 seasons? Even if he's not a star, if he's a top 15, top 20 kind of a guy, is this a guy that we can build the roster around? And you really can't get a good look at him because of the offensive line struggle. So when you see Shell and Compton and Beachum and Khalil, those 4 offensive linemen, when you see them all leaving free agency, that is the Jets doing, and I give them a lot of credit for this, doing what they said they were going to do and address this offensive line. They're not ignoring it for another offseason. They're not putting it off. They really jumped on it, and these 4 guys were all lined up in free agency, and they are all gone for the most part. I do not expect to see Beachum and Khalil back, even though they are still available. Probably could be signed for a lot less money. You could argue that with the money that the Jets have, that maybe you could bring back one of these guys on the cheap for some depth, and I wouldn't be against that, but I really don't expect that you'll see that. So these are 4 guys who are gone, and in view of the offensive line here, the Jets already brought 4 guys in free agency on the offensive line. That's a lot of people to sign to one position group in one offseason, but the Jets took this very seriously, and they did it. They got George Fant from Seattle, 3 years, $27 million at tackle. Connor McGovern, 3 years, $27 million there at center. Van Roten, 3 years, $11 million at guard. And then Josh Andrews, who won't start. Andrews will just be a backup at in depth. But Andrews there, 1 year, $1 million. They got 4 guys in here. Tackle, center, guard. They got 4 guys in here, and at least 3 of these guys, I think, Fant and McGovern for sure, and I think even Van Roten, have already gotten quite a bit of starts with other teams. I think Fant started for maybe a season and a half, 2 seasons. McGovern, same thing, and I think Van Roten even started some games as well. The important thing here, the 2 important things that I think you get out of these new offensive linemen, number 1 is you get a lot younger. On average, these 4 guys, Fant, McGovern, Van Roten, and Andrews, on average, they are 4 years younger per person than this group right here. So what you would expect to see is that these guys would continue to develop and continue to get better. Will we see that? I don't know. We'll talk about that here in just a second. But at least you've got guys who would tend to be a little less injury prone than the 4 players here, Shell, Compton, Beecham, and Khalil, and guys that you think could improve as the next couple of seasons go along. So those are the 2 important things that the Jets did do here. I think there's still a question about how much talent you brought in and how much consistent performance you brought in. That's still a question, but you know for sure the Jets have done this. They brought in Fant, McGovern, Van Roten, and Andrews on the offensive line. On average, you've gotten 4 years younger at each spot, and on average, that should make you less injury prone than older players. It should also give you the hope that over the next season, the next 2 seasons, these guys can continue to develop and get better. Now, the important question is, and this is always important, we can talk about signing guys for 3 years and $27 million all we want to. We can stir up some excitement with some free agent signings. The important question is, did we get better? Did the team actually get better? Did the offensive line get better? And I think that is still open to question. This isn't a very exciting opinion here, but I think that's still open to question. George Fant had an excellent year, I think it was, in 2018. Struggled in 2019. Didn't even play that much. I think he got a little over 500 snaps last year in Seattle. So which George Fant are you going to see? The one that showed up in 2018 and had a good solid season and looked like a very solid starter, or the one who played in 2019 and only got about 500 plus snaps last year and didn't look all that great when he did play? He didn't look horrible, but he didn't look great either. So I think there's a question mark. Now, is Fant going to be starting next year at tackle? I don't think there's any question about it. I think he and Edoga will be probably the starting tackles. But just how much talent do you have there with Fant, I think still remains to be seen. The good news with Fant, and actually the good news with all 4 of these players here, if it turns out in 2020 they have just an absolute dreadful nightmare of a performance in 2020, they're on the field for all 16 games, but they just look horrible. All 4 of these players, if you want to, you can get out of this contract after either 1 season or 2 seasons. Now, of course, Andrews is only a 1-year deal anyway. Van Roten and Fant, if you want to get out of their contract after 2020, there's very little dead money here. I think in the Van Roten contract, there's no dead money after 2020, and after 2020 for Fant, there's only about $2 million for dead money. So if for some reason George Fant and Van Roten come in and they don't look that good in 2020, and you want to cut ties with them, you can. You can do that. Even with McGovern here, 3 years, $27 million. After 2 seasons, you can let him go for, I think, almost no dead money. So you basically got him for 2020, 2021 with McGovern at center. But even if he doesn't look good after 2 seasons, you can let him go for very little money too. So the Jets here have done a very smart thing. They've gotten younger. They've got guys who should be less injury prone, guys who should be able to improve, and most importantly, they have not locked themselves in to 3 or 4 years of very large cap hits here. As a matter of fact, when you look at these 3 guys, especially Fant and Van Roten, they kind of look like stopgaps, which leads me to think probably more than likely the Jets were going to invest a couple of draft picks, maybe a 2nd rounder and a 4th rounder this year, maybe a 3 and a 5. I would expect to see the Jets use a couple of draft picks on the offensive line position. They haven't really done a lot of that over the past 5, 6, 7 seasons, and I think that's why it shows here on the offensive line, the lack of talent that you have here. Just haven't put a lot of draft picks in here. Now, what about the money? Are we overpaying these guys? For this next season, you're not paying these guys basically any more than what you were paying Shell, Compton, Beecham, and Khalil in 2019. So your cap numbers, even though they shuffle around a little bit, overall, these 4 players here aren't going to be any more expensive than the 4 players that you had last year on the offensive line that you were letting go into free agency. Beecham and Khalil were already making a pretty good amount of money last year. I think it was something like $9 million about $10 million and $5 million, something like that. Fant next year I think will be making $5 million. McGovern I think next year will be making something like $7 million. I'd have to look that back up again. But for the next season, for 2020, the cap numbers aren't any larger significantly for this group than they were for this group of 4 players that you let go in free agency. So the Jets have done a number of good things here. Is the talent better? I think that's a legit question mark with Van Roten and with Fant. I think with McGovern, we saw McGovern, he struggled in 2018, but 2019 he really came on, had an excellent season in 2019. I think was one of the better centers in the entire football league last year. Not a top 5 kind of guy, but really had an outstanding season and really came on in his 3rd year. So I think with McGovern moving forward, I think you've got a guy there who can start at center and kind of hold that position down and be a legit quality starter at center. So yeah, I think you have upgraded the offensive line. And more than likely, if you're just kind of weighing statistics, either Fant or Van Roten, one of the others, should step up. Just simply from a statistical perspective, one of these guys should step up and play well and be a decent starter for you next season. So yeah, I think you have upgraded here at offensive line. Even if you haven't, even from a talent and performance perspective, if you have not upgraded, if you're not any better from a talent standpoint than these 4 guys that you said goodbye to, you have at least, for a very good cap flexibility here, you're not locked in long-term on any of these guys at all. You have at least given yourself a chance to have fewer injuries and to grow and to develop and to be tougher and to be that on the offensive line. I think you've done an excellent job here with that. So kudos to the Jets for not ignoring this position, not ignoring a problem that was holding back their offense, not continuing to give something to Sam Darnold that was continuing to hinder his growth or allow you not to really ever see what kind of a quarterback he could be. So really excellent job here for the Jets, and I do think that they have upgraded here. They haven't just gotten younger. They haven't just gotten less injury prone. I really do think that they have made some small upgrades here. Having said that, I still think you'll see in the draft. Now, then go with offensive line. What else have they done here? Wide receiver Robbie Anderson is gone to Carolina for $10 million a season. I think it was a 3-year deal, 4-year deal, something of that nature. So he's gone to the Panthers. I think this is a solid decision to let him go. Good player, like Robbie Anderson, but I think he kind of had a ceiling there. I personally wouldn't want to be paying $10 million a season for what we saw out of Robbie Anderson over the past 2 seasons, but that's something the Panthers did. The Jets let him go. When you look at what the Jets are bringing back, Rashad Perriman coming in through free agency. Perriman, to me, when I look at what Perriman has done the past 3 seasons, Perriman has been much more consistent. Perriman is a very good wide receiver. He's nowhere near a number 1 wide out, and I don't think a number 2. This is just a good, solid guy who will catch a lot of balls, probably 40 or 50 catches a season, I would think. You might see him as low as 30, depending on what else goes on with the offense. The Jets have a number of other weapons here, so I don't know if he'll get up to 50 or not. But this guy can catch the football. He's a very reliable guy. I think he'll fit right in. 1 year, $7 million. You're not tied to him. You don't have him for the long term. But with Perriman here coming in instead of Robbie Anderson, I don't think there's any drop-off. Matter of fact, you might even be a little bit better. I don't think Perriman might not be as fast as Robbie Anderson was, but I don't think there's any drop-off here in terms of talent. I think you won't see any drop-off there in terms of wide receiver talent. Now, did you lose a little bit of depth? Perhaps. Demaryius Thomas, who had a pretty solid season last year, getting a little bit long of tooth and age, but still had a pretty good season last year. They haven't brought him back yet, so instead of having 4 solid wide receivers, which you had last year, right now you've only got 3 on the roster. They did bring in Josh Doxson, who, man, Doxson coming out of the draft a few seasons ago really had a lot of people excited coming out of Texas Christian. Really good looking young player, had a lot of athleticism, has never lived up to it in the NFL. Maybe he'll show you something with the Jets this season, maybe not. They did bring him in, so he's got a chance to try to compete for a roster spot. We'll see what happens with Doxson. But even so, maybe you're not quite as deep at wide receiver as you were last season. But in terms of your top 3 starting wide receivers, I don't think there's any drop-off here because you still have Enunwa, you still have Jamison Crowder, and then you add in Perriman right here. I think you have 3 solid options, and this isn't just wishful thinking. These are guys who have shown you over the past 2 or 3 seasons that, yes, you can count on us to produce. And I think that's important here for Sam Darnold moving forward. You still don't have a game breaker here at wide receiver. That's something you might see in the draft. But here at wide receiver, you are solid. Nothing to worry about there. CB is an interesting spot. CB, The Jets have let go of Darryl Roberts, been with them for a while. $5.8 million is what they saved. For somebody who's not a CB1 or CB2, and Roberts isn't and never will be, $5.8 million was starting to get a little bit heavy. I would have understood if the Jets brought him back, but you got other positions that need the money. So them letting go of Roberts indicates to me, I think, what they really think about Poole and Mallette. So they brought back Mallette, and they've got Poole coming back as well, and I think they feel pretty good about those two guys right there at CB1 and CB2. Are they great? Certainly Mallette's not. Poole possibly could be. We'll see what he looks like in 2020, but I think you're fine there at CB. So letting Roberts go and saving $5.8 million, no surprise. Letting Kennedy go to free agency. He's already picked up with Dallas for $1.3 million. And then, of course, not a huge surprise here was Tremaine Johnson. Performance-wise, there were some questions about the finances, how that would work out, but the Jets have managed to work that out. They're going to release him. They're going to save about $11 million. He turned out to be a P61 cut. With Tremaine Johnson, this was a free agent signing that just never worked out. Performance-wise, he just never made a difference on the Jets. Not sure why, but he just never worked out for the Jets. This is just one of those free agent signings that never worked out, so the Jets cut ties with him. From a performance standpoint, the Jets will not miss Johnson's performance or Kennedy's. You might miss the depth that Roberts has to offer here, but what they did do in order to address that depth, they brought in Pierre Desir. Desir is an interesting guy. Desir has been, I think, in the league for 5 or 6 seasons now, and he's had as many good seasons as he's had bad seasons. He's really been a guy, you don't see too many guys who have a career arc the way his is, but he is truly a guy who is up one season and down the next. We've seen him have a couple of outstanding seasons playing CB, and we've seen him have a couple of seasons that he just kind of looks lost out there, and you wonder what's happened. But this is a guy, I think, who at least gives you depth. With Pierre Desir, you're really not counting on him to be CB1 or CB2. You're just counting on him to add depth. And for $4 million, that's a very good price here. So I think it's a good decision to let Darryl Roberts go. I think at the end of the day, Desir is a better athlete. I think he's got a better top end by far than Roberts has. So I think it's a good gamble. You actually save a little bit of money, and you hope to bring in a better athlete who has at times shown that he can be a very good CB in this league, even though he really struggled in 2019. This was a guy who has shown for a couple of seasons, I think in 17 and 15, I think, that he could be a very good CB in this league. So bringing in Pierre Desir here for 1 year, $4 million is a very good move for the Jets. I think it's a smart, savvy move here. And I don't think, even though you're losing some guys at CB, I don't think you're going to miss the performance of the talent, considering that you did bring back Poole and you did bring back Mallette coming back at CB. So very quickly, what could the Jets possibly be looking to do in the draft? The Jets are one of the few teams who don't necessarily have to go need in the draft. Do they have some spots that they need more than others? Yes, but they've got a pretty well-rounded roster. There's no bleeding holes if you assume that these 4 players have indeed upgraded the offensive line. Now, like I said, I still think that the Jets could do very well. Probably not use pick number 11. That would surprise me a little bit, but it wouldn't surprise me for them to use their 2nd and their 3rd, or their 3 and their 5 on the offensive line to get even younger, to continue to develop, and to try to infuse more talent into that offensive line. So when you look here at the draft picks that they do have coming up here at the tail end of the week, I think the Jets could truly and justly go just about anywhere they want to, any position on the team, any position group on the field, and I wouldn't feel bad about that. Now, other people out there are going to be screaming for an edge rusher, or screaming for a tackle, or screaming for a wide receiver, and that's all fine if the Jets do that, and I wouldn't be surprised. Those are probably 3 of the bigger needs on the team, but they don't have to. If they've got a guy they like here at number 11, when they get to number 11, they do not have to go with any certain position. They are not bleeding now at this point. If you assume that these offensive linemen have addressed all of this red ink here that you see for the offensive side of the football, there is nothing that they have to do from a drafting standpoint to necessarily get them this season. Now, can you upgrade? Can you get better? Yes, you can. At almost every position. At almost every position besides safety, you could right here with this number 11 draft pick get better. So I can see them drafting in almost any position. I would really like to see, if I was picking here for the Jets at number 11, I would love to see them go to wide receiver or edge rusher. I think when you look at both sides of the football, you don't see a whole lot of holes on the defense or the offense, but you also don't see a whole lot of game breakers and special talents. Guys who are truly difference makers in the NFL, and guys that offensive and defensive coordinators have to game plan for. You've done a very good job building a very solid foundation here if you're the Jets, but I don't see anybody here that hardly on the Jets that are truly game breakers. You got Jamal Adams at safety, of course. After that, maybe Le'Veon Bell at running back. So it would be nice, it would be really nice here at number 11 if you could get an edge rusher or wide receiver who could really just add some fuel. And again, there's the pun, but who could really just add some fuel to either the offensive side of the football or the defensive side of the football. If it is an edge rusher, and there's been quite a demand from fans and media alike for edge rusher for the past 2 or 3 seasons for the Jets. Like I said, we're seeing teams who do not have an elite edge rusher put together some pretty good defenses and even win a lot of playoff games and even get to Super Bowls without an elite edge rusher. So you don't have to have that, but it would be nice, right? You've got a lot of other pieces on defense, you've got a lot of good things. It would be really great if you had a guy who was an edge rusher, and if you could take him right here at number 11. Wide receiver is pretty deep. You could probably almost, I don't know, we'll see what teams do. I don't know if somebody will surprise us and grab one of those top 3 wide receivers there in the top 10 picks. But when you come around to number 11 here, you got CeeDee Lamb, you've got Jerry Jeudy, and you've got the other kid from Alabama as well, who I think all 3 of them look very, very intriguing. And you think about adding one of those kind of wide receivers to the Jets here, who already have guys at wide receiver who are solid, and they've got a good running back, and they've got a solid tight end. But you think about adding a guy here at wide receiver at number 11, like a Jeudy or like a Lamb, or like the other kid, Alabama kid, and I'm sorry, I can't remember his name at the second. If you think about adding somebody like that, again, just an extra layer here to the offense, and really hopefully give Sam Darnold more of a chance to develop. And maybe even if he's only a 15 or 20, top 15, 20 kind of a quarterback, you give yourself a chance here to just give him more weapons. So that's what I would like to see right here at number 11, probably either wide receiver or edge rusher. But I could see them going in a number of directions, especially if they really like a guy there who on their big board just ranks higher than anybody at wide receiver or edge rusher. Here at 48, 68, 79, again, I've said this twice already in the video, I would really love to see them use a couple of these draft picks right in here. Maybe 2 out of these 3 draft picks on the offensive line. I just think it's a very good investment. And so for the rest of the draft picks, we could see them go in any number of directions. CB would be another position here. I think after Poole looked great last year. See if he can repeat that performance. But after Poole, I think there's quite a drop-off in terms of talent. It's not unusual in the NFL. Most teams only have one good CB. You don't see a whole lot of CB2s in the league who are really good, anywhere near as good as a lot of teams' CB1s. So if you could draft somebody right in here at CB as well, I think that would be a very good investment as well. All right. Thank you. If you are still watching, thank you very much for watching this Jets video. We'll see you coming up. Hope you enjoyed the draft. Have a great one. Goodbye.